Welcome to, let's see, this would be actually week 11 of the Moda Sampler Block Shuffle. So the first of my 2 quilts is done. Hopefully next week I will have my second quilt all done. And stay tuned to see exactly how it is that I put this one together. It's time to start working on the alternating blocks for the top of the quilt. And on the alternating blocks, I know I need a total of 20 of them. There's 6.5 inches square, so just doing math, I know I need to cut 4 pieces that are 6.5 inches wide by the width of the fabric. And I'm gonna have some extras, but I have to cut that in order to get it. So I've taken my fabric, I took and I cut a full, I think it was like 28 inches, 29 inches off of my big piece so that I have one good sized piece to work with. I want to cut all of these at once. I don't want to be messing around cutting some and then coming back and cutting more. So you can see I actually tore the fabric. I do like to tear the fabric. If it's good quality fabric, it'll tear really straight. This is a Moda fabric. It's, if you can see the case, it's a Bella Solid. And the name on it of it is Kansas Red. And the item code, the item and the color number is 9900150. So that's what that is, and I wanted to make sure you knew that. This is what I'm doing as my alternating block. So I took my 29 inch piece and I ripped it. I took it over to the pressing station and I pressed it really good. I did use magic sizing this time when I pressed it, and you can see there isn't any flaking or anything like that. I've never had that problem with the magic sizing. Then I come and I line it up. Whatever it takes to get this bottom along here laying really flat. And sometimes to do that, your edges along here are not gonna match up. And I just literally, see if I can do it on camera or not. I just take it between my fingers and just move it back and forth until it lines up and it's good and square and it's flat and it all lines up. So once I do that, I go over it one more time with my hands just to make sure I'm nice and flat. And then I'll bring my 2 sides up together. And here I do the same thing. I just very gently, I get to pet the fabric is what I say. I get to play with it. I just press it with my hands to make sure it's flat and I don't have any ridges or bumps. Then I take my board here and I use that as my initial guide. So what I'll do is I'll just take my pieces and I'll line it right up here on this line so that I can just barely see that line. But anyhow, so here's this. The next thing I'm gonna do is I'll come down here and I'm gonna use this line on the board just to square that edge up. Then I'm gonna cut them 6.5 inches all the way down. Then I'll cut them. And I'll come back and show you how I subcut them. Because I folded this piece of fabric twice, I have 4 layers. Because I have 4 layers, what I can do is actually take my 12.5 inch Creative Grids ruler and I can just lay this down and measure the fabric for 6.5 inches. And what I'm gonna do, if you can, I know it's tough to see it, I'll move it over here and just show you, is I'm gonna line up the bottom of the fabric because I know the fabric's square. It's on this board that I've already laid out, but I can line it up across the bottom here. I can double check across the top here and I'll just cut it my 6.5. I'm gonna do that 4 times. So how I'm gonna start putting this together is I'm gonna put these 3 blocks together. Then once these 3 are, then I'm gonna come down and I'm gonna put these, 5 blocks together. So normally when you sew a quilt together, you're going across these straight rows. Well, on this one, what we're gonna be doing is attaching it together diagonally. And we're gonna go all the way down. Once I get all of the pieces put together like this, then I'm going to come back and I'm going to attach the end pieces. Then I'll put the rows together. So first I put my pieced blocks with my setting blocks, then I'll start working on my corners, which make the point, or make the quilt straight. I think you can see what I'm doing here is I'm working on the quilt in a diagonal motion. So you can see here, this is actually row 4. I'm putting the quilt up on the design wall so that I can see what it looks like. And then I'm putting the blocks together. And as I put them together, I'm going to take them over and sew them. And then I'll bring them back to the design wall again. Lay them back out so that I make sure that I get them all lined up correctly. In this clip, I'm going to show you how I pin my blocks together. What I did was I pinned first to each side on each end. So you can see me doing the right corner first. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up my left side. I'm going to pin that. And what this allows me to do is work any fullness that I have in the block into that secondary or the solid fabric block. And then I'll just go ahead and sew it. And really it works great to get rid of any fullness that's in that block. So I've started and I've gotten all of my rows put together. Quite honestly, it didn't take me that long to do. And I threw clips, I think I threw clips of how I went about doing it. I purposely left it up on the design wall and took each row one at a time off, and quite honestly just took it as pieces off so that I didn't get my mix up of my order at all. The other thing that I did was I took a photograph of it with the camera and with my phone so that I could keep referring back to it in the event that I mixed up some of the blocks. If you don't care where your blocks go, just throw it all together. So the next thing that I need to do is I need to get my triangles put on my end pieces. And again, just like how I put the strips together, I'm going to keep it up on the design wall, because depending upon which way you need, because the quilt, depending upon how you set the triangle in this area, will depend upon the direction of the row. So what I need to do is make certain that I have it correct. The last 2 triangles I add are the ones on the bottom right corner for me and the top left corner for me. Those are the last 2, and then the last blocks I put on my 4 corner blocks. That's how I finish it up, is with the 4 corners. So I'm going to go back to my directions and find out what size it is that I need to cut these at, and then I will get those sewn on. Once those are sewn on, then I can start putting rows together. Once I get the rows all together, then it's time to measure for our flying geese border. So we're getting there. I'm working on the triangles that will actually, this is what leads the quilt to being on point versus vertical or horizontal. So what I've done to make life easy on myself is I took and I printed the 4th page out of the instructions. Here is, and then I took cut it out and I'm taping it to the back of one of my rulers. I cut my strip 5 inches. The directions call for 4 7/8, but I did mine 5 inches. And I have 4 layers here. And what I'm going to do is just lay my triangle right here on the edge of my fabric. And I'm just gonna cut through all of them. I'm gonna do exactly what they said in the instructions. And I'm going to just rotate my ruler to each side and continue cutting. And I'm going to do that for my entire piece. And hopefully I will have enough. I'll start at this row and attach these to each other. Then I'll do this row. Then I'll sew these two together, press them, put it back up on the board. Then I'll do this one, attach it, put it back up on the board. Do this one, attach it, put it back up on the board. So I'm gonna, just what I'll do is probably sew this chunk together, then this chunk together, then this chunk together, and then I'll put it all together in 3 pieces. Just makes it a little bit more manageable to do it like that. Okay, so here is the quilt top put together. Now I don't have any borders and I still need to square it up. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take it over to my cutting table and I'm going to take a ruler and I'm going to trim this to exactly 1/4 inch all the way around so that I am good and square. Then once I've done the squaring of it, then I'm gonna start measuring. Now I need to put my flying geese together, and you can see 4 of my flying geese over there, but I need to put my flying geese together to go all the way around the quilt. In the directions, they indicated a specific size to do the flying geese. I don't do my borders like that. So what I'm going to do is, once I get this squared up, I'm going to measure the top across, the middle across, the bottom across. I'm going to take that measurement, I'm going to add all 3 of them together, and then I'm going to divide it by 3. And what that is going to tell me is the exact length of my bottom and my top border. Then at that point in time, I can calculate out my flying geese to make sure that I make just enough flying geese, or put together just enough flying geese to do this top and the bottom border. Then once I have my top and my bottom border put together, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure here, down the center, and here. I'm going to add those 3 numbers together, and that's going to give me the size that I need for my 2 side borders. Then, once I've done that, then I can start working on my outer borders. But it's really important that when you go to do your borders, you do them right. Because what a border really does is it frames your quilt. So if you've got anything in your quilt that's not perfectly centered or perfectly squared, by doing your border this way, it's going to square your quilt. So that's what I'm going to do first. Once I have gotten this measured, or excuse me, squared up, then measured, then I'm going to start my flying geese. I have a huge ruler here. It's actually a 20.5 inch ruler. I know many of you don't have this big of a ruler, but I do, and I really do like it. I use it a lot. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna line up my 1/4 inch that's on my ruler right here. I'm gonna line it up to all of these points. I'm gonna do one side at a time so that as long as you have a long ruler, you'll be okay. So I'm lining up my 1/4 inch. It's away from me, so it's kind of tough because I can't really easily see it completely. Okay, so I've lined up at least 2 points, okay? I'm gonna trim to here, then I'm going to trim this side. I'll turn my ruler. So this is my first trim, and I'm really not gonna trim much past this quarter because I don't have my next quarter lined up, and in case my quilt's a little bit off, I could end up with it not perfectly square down here. So I'm gonna do it from here to my quarter. And then I'm just gonna clip off that extra piece right there. Clean that up. And then I'm gonna turn my ruler and I'm gonna do it this side. And the reason I'm turning my ruler is only because the 1/4 inch is really easy to see on this side. And I wanna be able to see it as easily as possible. So I'm lining my quarter here, in here, and then I'm gonna line it up here too. Now, if you just had a 12-inch ruler, this is my 12.5-inch ruler, see, you could do the same thing. It will work, okay? I want you to know that you'll be okay with your smaller rulers, but I do like the bigger one for doing this type of a project. It's nice. So I'm lining up my quarter, lining up my quarter at the top, and I'm just gonna trim this side. And again, how I stopped at the point here, I'm gonna stop at the point here. And I know I'm just on camera for this, for that one. But I'm gonna clean up this side. All right, I'm gonna do that first on all 4 sides. Then once I have my 4 sides done, then I'll be able to use just the let me get it out for you so you can see it. My long Creative Grids ruler, that's the 24.5 by 8-inch, 8.5-inch ruler. So I'll use that one once I get my 4 corners squared off. Not hard to do. It's important to square it off though so that your quilt stays square. If you don't square it off, the quilt that you're starting with before you even begin to put your borders on isn't square or straight. So you wanna make sure that you do that step. I will be back once my quilt is all squared up so that I can show you how I'm gonna go about measuring it. All right, we've got the quilt all trimmed up, and there aren't many tools that I'm gonna tell you are a real must. I'm gonna mostly tell you that they're really nice and I like them. I'm not gonna tell you that you have to have them. When it comes to doing borders, there's one that you really do need, and that is a nice long measuring tape, a flexible tape that you can lay out across your quilt. So, gotta grab a piece of paper. All right, so I'm going to put my top borders on first, okay? So I need to know how long the quilt is across the top, across the middle, and across the bottom. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those 3 measurements, add them together, and divide them by 3. And that's going to be how long my flying geese need to be. So I'm going to lay this quilt out nice and flat. This is just my top. I'm going to lay it out smooth and flat. I'm going to take my measuring tape and I'm going to measure it. And I'm going to lay it here. And I'm going to go right across the top. And I'm going to tell you that I am 43 3/8. Then I'm going to take it to the middle. I'm going to write that down. Now I'm going to go to the middle of my quilt. So it's 5 rows down, so I'm going to go right across the middle row here. Do the same thing, make sure it's all nice and smooth. And I'm going to measure this one row. Measure right across the center. Whoop, wrong way. And on this one, I am 43. And I knew there was a difference because I could see it. Now all of my blocks have already been squared up, but yeah, I'm off of, I'm a little bit different. That happens. That's what sewing's all about. Sometimes You know, you've got an exact 1/4 inch, sometimes you've got a chunky quarter, sometimes you've got a real thin 1/4 inch seam. So that's why it's so important that you measure it every single time. I don't care who wrote the pattern. I don't care what fabric designer or what fabric company wrote a pattern. If the pattern tells you to cut your borders X amount and attach them, do not do it. Measure your quilt because your 1/4 is different than somebody else's 1/4. And it makes a big difference. So you just please don't do it. Do yourself a favor so that your borders are nice and square and straight. And this one, believe it or not, is 43 3/4. So I definitely am different all the way across. Okay, so now I'm gonna take my handy dandy calculator and I'm gonna add together 43.375, which is 43 3/8. And I'm gonna add 43 to that, and I'm gonna add 43.75, which is 43 3/4. Then I'm gonna divide that by 3, and I've come up with my border needs to be 43.375 inches long. So my next step is to take my flying geese border and measure that. That's how long mine needs to be. So I'm going to do that. Then once I've done that, I'm going to show you how I go about attaching that border to the quilt. So that if there is any fullness, or in my case, I do have fullness in one of them. My bottom is fuller than my top. So it's actually a full 1/2 inch that I've got to compensate for. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to compensate for that. So I'll meet you over at the sewing machine in just a minute and we'll get pinning, okay? Now it's time to attach my flying geese border, which I've measured out and I know is the right length, to my quilt. So you can see, or at least I hope you can see, I've put a bunch of pins in my quilt top, 3 of them to be exact. So what I did was I took my quilt top, I folded it in half and I found my center. Then I folded it in half again and found my center again. I did the exact same thing with my flying geese. So now what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to match up pin to pin and I'm going to pin it in place. Pin to end. And I'm going to pin that in place. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the center of these 2 points. I'm going to pin that. Then the center of these 2 points, pin that. I'm going to do that all the way down the top and the bottom of the quilt. And then I will sew a 1/4 inch. When I go to sew the 1/4 inch, I'm going to do it with the top of the quilt down and the flying geese up. That way I'm gonna have some control over all of these presses. I want them all to lay as flat as possible. So make certain that when you put your borders on your quilt, you find your centers. First one center, then you find and you split it into 1/4s, then you're gonna split it into 1/8s, and you're gonna pin it all the way down. And what that's going to do is very evenly distribute any fullness that you have in your quilt. And we know I've got fullness. We know I do. So in here, you can perfectly see I've got fullness. But what I'm going to do is I'm gonna fold this in half again. Find my center. I'm gonna put a pin in that. So I've pinned those 2. Then I'm gonna do it again. I'm gonna fold this in half, or I'm just gonna hold it. I can find my center there. So I'm gonna take my 2 pieces, I'll line up my fabric, I'm gonna find my center, and I'm gonna pin it again. And I'm gonna keep doing that the entire way down. This thing is going to be pin heaven. It's going to have more pins in it than you can ever imagine. But what that's going to do is it's going to very, very evenly distribute any fullness that I have, and I know I've got fullness, into the quilt so that my quilt lays as flat as I can possibly make it lay. So I'll see you once I have all 4 of my borders on, because I'm going to do that with my top and bottom. Then once I've added my top and bottom, I'm going to add my 2 sides on, and then we come back for one more set of borders. We're almost done. Please excuse the threads. I'm certain you're going to be able to see them, but here I am with my very first borders on. Now that I've got my first borders on, I'm going to give it a good press, and then I am going to again measure. And my measurements are going to be from here to that side. I'm going to do 3 of them. 1 across the top, 1 across the middle, and 1 across the bottom. Add those 3 numbers together, divide them by 3. That's going to be the length of what I need my upper and bottom border to be. Once I've sewn my upper and bottom border on, I am then going to measure again from top to bottom. Then I'm going to measure once here, center, the other side, add those numbers together, divide it by 3, and that's going to be the measurement for my left and my right borders. So I know I keep saying this, but it's really, really important, because if you don't measure your borders correctly, when it comes back from the long armor, it's going to have wavy borders. It's not because they stretched it on the long arm. That has nothing to do with it. What has to do with it is the fact that your borders weren't put on right. Now, one of the things in this quilt that I'm going to give real kudos to the designers is the way the designers had us cut these setting triangles is so that your bias is not out here. What that's going to do is kind of control the quilt a little bit. It's going to keep it boxed in so that you have less chance of those wavy borders that we all just really don't like. So this is where I'm at. I'm going to do my borders, and once those borders are done, my very first quilt top is finished. And I just got to pick out something for the backing so that I can get it on the long arm. I'm pretty excited about it. Hi everybody. So thanks for sticking around all the way to the very end of this one. Here again is my quilt completely put together. It does need to be pressed again, but it's all done and it is now ready for the long arm. I have no clue on how I'm going to quilt it, but I am very happy with this one. I have picked out the background fabric for the second one, and I have also decided on my borders. I'm doing different borders for the second quilt. So please do come back next week to see that one. And if there is anything in the making of this quilt that you would like me to show when I put together the second quilt, please do leave a comment below, and I will make certain when I start taping it, I do include that within the video. I'm going to start on Monday making it, so if you could please submit those comments or requests by Sunday night, that would be fantastic. So thank you so very much for joining me, and I'll see you again next week for the second quilt of the Moda Sampler Block Shuffle. Thanks!